Glass is Bob Swider. And my name is Celia Garland. I'm going to be narrating for this first piece of glass. Now, Taryn has already jumped right into the process, so I'm going to jump right into the narration. Taryn has picked a hollow stainless steel blowpipe and gathered a little bit of clear glass off the end of her pipe. Now, the furnace that she gathered out of holds about 150 pounds of molten glass inside a big pot in the bottom. And she'll use that to gather more material as well as to start melting in some of that color that she has picked up on the outside of her piece. Because Taryn gathered clear glass out of the furnace because that's all that's in there. We start with a nice blank slate, a clean canvas every day. And so Taryn wants to color her piece this morning, so she's actually rolling through some crushed glass color called the frit. Now, to get different colors into our glass, we add different metal oxides, and the colors that Taryn has chosen this morning are two different shades of purple. So she would have had to add, or rather the company that we purchased it from, added manganese to the glass to get those different tones for us. The more time she rolls through that crushed glass color, the more color she picks up on the surface, the denser that color is going to become. Just like putting paint on the walls at home, the more rolls of color, the richer that color becomes. Now, the shades that Taryn's using, one of them is opaque, the other is transparent. And so they're going to give us very different effects as they melt in. Now, I did say she's using purple. A lot of the time she's working, those colors are going to glow red, glow orange, and that's just because of the heat we're using. Everything that we're using, all of our equipment, or at least our two main pieces, are over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That melting furnace is at a temperature of 2,120 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's about the same temperature as a volcano. So you didn't know that, you signed up for a cold Alaskan cruise, but luckily we packed along our own mini volcano. So it should keep us all warm up here on deck 15. But Taryn's just using that furnace right now for its ambient heat. She's using it to melt in all of that crushed glass, starting to establish that form. And she can come back to the bench and start to use different hand tools as well. Obviously, since her glass is over 2,000 degrees, she can't touch it, shape it with her hands. So we have a series of different tools that we use as an extension of our hands to be able to form the glass. The one she has now is a large wooden scoop. We call it a block, and she's able to use that to shape it up. But watch right here. Sharon's going to blow in through the pipe, cap it with her thumb, and then watch the end of the glass. You want to watch for just a little bit of an expansion, just a little bit of a puff up. And that's going to tell us that Taryn has introduced an air bubble into her glass. When that happens, we know that from that point on, her glass is going to be hollow. And that's going to be our starter bubble, our base structure, foundation for the rest of piece that Taryn has in mind. So you can see it inflated just a little bit. That's glass blowing, folks. Thanks for coming up. Nah, you're too quick for that. So she has just this starter bubble. She is going to gather some more glass on top. But before she can do that, she wants to make sure that she has a really nice, even surface, and then she's going to let her glass get ice cold. And I'm not talking the type of ice we're going to encounter in Tracy Arm Fjord on Monday, but rather we're talking about glassblower ice cold, which is right around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, glass is solid once more. It's no longer flexible, it's unable to move, and that's going to be really structurally sound for Taryn to go back to the furnace and wind up some more material. She's going to be just about doubling or tripling the amount of material that she has off the end. And do you notice that her starter bubble looks much bigger now? It's not actually, but what she has is a new layer of curved, thick glass across the surface, which is acting as a magnifying lens. It's actually magnifying that starter bubble underneath, which is what allows us to use so little color compared to our clear glass, while still appearing to make solid glass color pieces. So whenever we finish a piece, our glass is typically about 5% color, about 95% clear glass. No matter what these pieces up front, how thick and dense in color that looks, you take a cross section, you see just this tiny little band of color, and that's how we're able to achieve that, those wonderful optics in glass. Taryn's decided to come over now and start to shape her glass using this table. We call this table a marver, and they're made out of naval-grade bronze. Traditionally on land, they'd be made out of stainless steel, but out here in our salt air environment, they rust far too quickly. So instead we use this naval-grade bronze, which is actually the same material that they use for the ship's propellers. So if it can last underwater without rusting away, up here in our open air environment, it has absolutely no problem staying nice and structurally sound for us to be able to use it. Now Taryn will use these tables when she wants to shape and or cool her glass, because we're going to want to manage the heat as much as we can throughout the entire process. So right now Taryn's getting it hot. She has a very distinct shape, this nice tall cone. And I want you to keep your eyes on Taryn now, because she's going to get her glass pretty hot. Yeah. She's going to get her glass pretty hot, and then she's going to come over and drop it into one of our molds at the front of the stage. And what that's going to do is give her a series of texture across the outside. So watch this. She has her glass nice and hot. You can see it flexing, moving around, and then pressing that glass into the mold, giving it a nice puff, capping that, and then allowing that glass to inflate and fill the mold. Look at the texture she comes out with. Very nicely done. So now that she has that this, if she just were to inflate and make her piece out of this, but watch Taryn now. She has something else entirely in mind. She's going in with her tweezers, and she's actually pinching together a couple of those ridges, pinching it along in a series of pattern called diamond ways. It's a very traditional pattern in glass, and she's doing that by just touching the points together, and those hot points in glass are going to fuse, so that as we inflate this glass, as we change the shape, it's going to continue to look this lovely diamond faceted pattern that she's created on the very surface. Now, whenever we use our molds, we're never finishing our shape. Unless you wanted to make a citrus reamer or an orange juicer, she has to change her glass a little bit more than just the mold. We don't have any molds up here that we blow the glass into and say, look, we have a bottle. Instead, all of our molds are used either in patterning or for texture. And so Taryn's decided to use it for the texture this morning. Keep bringing that glass back up to temperature. Taryn's doing something very important right now. She started the inflation process, but see this line that she's carving in right off the head of the pipe? That's important to every single piece of glass that we're going to make this cruise. You always have to have this constriction line off the head of the pipe. And we call it a jack line because the tool that Taryn's using to create it is called the jacks. And so the reason that that jack line is important is because it's a designed weak point in the glass that's going to allow us to remove it from the blowpipe when we're ready. Because right now you'll notice that none of our display glass in the front has 4.5, 5 foot stainless steel pipe still attached to it. We need a way to remove it, and that's what that constriction line is going to do for us. We're going to allow that part of the glass to get very cold in a very controlled manner, and then we're actually going to go ahead and break it free at that line. And you can think about that line a little bit like you would the perforation in a piece of paper or that groove in a chocolate bar that allows you to split it and share if you were so inclined to share your chocolate. But the more defined that line, the more predictably and the more easily we know we can break our glass free. So Taryn adds that line, and now that she has it established, she can go ahead and finish shaping up the bottom half of our vessel. This is a very traditional way of working from the bottom half of our glass up to the top. And so she'll get her base of her glass all set. She said she was making a bowl for us this morning. So we'll watch her add maybe a foot, maybe a flattened surface to the bottom so that her bowl will sit nicely on the table. And then go ahead and we'll turn this piece around, which I'll get to in just a moment here. But everyone usually has a common misconception that glass blowers have lungs of steel, that it takes a lot of air pressure and a lot of control in order to inflate that glass. Now that's not quite true. I'd say the three of us probably have great lung capacity, but it doesn't come from glass blowing. It comes from all this talking that we're doing when we're up on stage. And so instead, the glass is very easy to inflate. The hotter that you have your glass from our furnace is going to present that to Taryn, and she's going to drop it right on the bottom. So watch what happens when Bob stops turning that pipe. That glass falls right off down onto the very bottom of Taryn's bubble, right onto the very bottom of her bowl. That's fusing instantaneously because of how hot that is. And now while that glass is hotter than the rest of her form, she can use that timing in order to go ahead and shape it up really carefully without worrying about distorting the rest of her form. She gets this really nice shape, this really nice elevated foot for her bowl, and that finishes off or completes the bottom of our piece. So now that we have the bottom finished, now that she's happy with her foot, the next thing we're going to need to do is open up the lip of our bowl. And of course, we can't do that right now because we're still attached to the blowpipe. We're still attached to our starting rod that allowed us to inflate it. And so we need to remove it from the pipe now and turn it around. And the way that we do that is called the puntee process. So the puntee process that we're about to go through is the most precarious part of the entire process. And it is for just about every single piece that we're making. So when Taryn's happy with the temperature of the foot, when she's happy with the shape, she'll ask Bob to go ahead and gather a little bit more clear glass. All right. So Bob's getting ready to gather that little bit more glass. And he's going to go ahead and shape that little bit of hot glass into sort of a pointed dome, a rounded, almost Q-tip-like shape. And then they're going to attach it to the very bottom of Taryn's piece. And when they do that, that'll be when Taryn goes ahead and uses that constriction line in order to break her glass free. So when she goes ahead and breaks this glass free, she's going to have to thermally shock that area she wants to have break because she doesn't want to let it get so cold that it breaks on its own. She's going to speed up that process by adding a little bit of water. But first, this connection that we make has to be exactly the right temperature because if it's not, when Taryn goes to break free that first connection, she'll break both connections and that piece will hit the floor. If the connection's too hot when she goes to do this transfer, Bob won't have the stability, the control in order to keep the glass turning, to keep it on center, and that piece falls to the floor. If you're off by about 50 degrees in either direction, that piece of glass falls to the floor. And you don't see us out here running around with thermometers, making sure that the glass is going to be that perfect temperature because it's different for every piece, the size, the thickness of your glass, how long you've been out of the reheating furnace. But instead, we know what the perfect temperature is by how many times we've done this wrong, by how many hundreds of pieces of glass we've dropped on the floor in the learning process to know what looks and feels exactly right. So attaching that puntee to the very bottom center of her piece, blowing on it to actually cool it down to make it a little bit more stable for Bob to catch. And then when Taryn's convinced that it's at exactly the right temperature, she'll add a few drops of water to that constriction line, that jack line, and then go ahead and give it a tap and break it right up. Very nicely done. And you see that Bob wastes no time in coming right back to the reheating furnace. He comes right back over here because we let that glass and feeling the glass through a lot of experience, and by turning the pipe, you have a good sense of how flexible that glass is by how fast you have to turn to keep that glass on center. Because has anybody noticed that Taryn has never stopped turning this glass? Not once. And the reason for that is that if she stopped turning, it would just drip and fall to the floor. The glass can be very viscous at a lot of parts in the process. And even if it's not hot enough to drip to the floor, it's definitely still hot enough to fall off center. And if you allow your glass to fall off center, it can be very hard to recover. And it'll start to look like you made your glass on its way to the toast. Is exactly what we're doing to keep this hot glass off the floor. And so very quickly, every time Taryn comes back to the reheating furnace, she's going ahead and using a different series of tools in order to open this shape up, to really start to get it to the shape she wants it. And you can see a little bit of a heat glow. You see some sparks and some steam off that tool that she's using. And she had switched to a wooden set of jacks, and the reason for that is, of course, because the wood is a little bit softer on the glass. We have those metal jacks that she could also use, but they steal more heat out of the glass. The more heat they steal, the more time she has to return to the reheating furnace in order to continue working it. So she probably bought herself an extra 2 seconds at the working bench. Yeah, and that's not a whole lot of time, but that little bit of extra time really helps with the efficiency of the process, really makes sure that you're able to work the glass very well in order to make your desired shape. Now, Taryn was just saying there, she was communicating with me a little bit about the opening and closing of these doors, because you'll notice that who's ever narrating will always be operating these doors. And the reason for that, of course, is that we don't want to be letting the heat out of the oven. It would be like if you were baking cookies and had to check on them every 3 seconds because you were so excited that you let all the heat out and they just never bake. If we leave all the doors open, we lose too much heat in the furnace, it takes too long to come back up, and our reheating flashes get longer and longer. But of course, as the piece gets larger and larger, we have to open more and more doors to be able to get the piece in and out in order. It got larger right in that last moment. So while she was actually working on that, she said, all right, I need you to stand by the doors because it's getting hot. And she didn't want to thread the needle quite that closely, because what do you reckon happens if Taryn bumps the doors? It wouldn't necessarily break, the glass is still too hot for that, but on her way in with the glass at its coldest point, she'd probably leave a little bit of the door on the glass. But on the way back out, while her glass is much hotter, while it's really flexible, she'd probably leave some glass on the door. And so we never want that. You'll notice we have a few smudge spots on the doors. It does happen from time to time because we're not only glass blowers, but extreme glass blowers out here on the open sea. But the very last step in the process is what's going to take the longest now, because we have a beautiful bowl, right folks? Excellent. But right now, we need to put this bowl safely in this unassuming black box that's been sitting behind Taryn. This is called our annealing oven, or our cool down oven. And it's going to cool this piece of glass slowly from just over 1,000 degrees down to room temperature. So a light tap, that glass pops right off. Inside the annealer it goes. And let's give Taryn a great big round of applause. A fantastic piece of glass.